A ruthless mafia boss visited a rundown nursing home to make a donation, but ended up frozen in shock when he found his mother, the woman who supposedly died 35 years ago. And what she whispered to him brought the most powerful man in Chicago to his knees. Cole Blackwell had everything: money, power, an empire that controlled half of Chicago's underground. But he carried an old wound no one knew about: a mother who died when he was a baby. Or so his Aunt Trish always told him. That Friday, Cole walked into Sunny Meadows Care Home for a simple publicity stunt. Hand over a check, take some photos, leave. But the moment he stepped inside, something pulled at his chest. Then he saw her, an old woman in a wheelchair, white tangled hair, forgotten by everyone. A young caregiver named Harper was gently brushing her hair, the only person who bothered to care for her. Cole couldn't look away. Something about the old woman's face made his blood run cold. "Who is she?" he asked. "Eleanor," Harper answered. "She's been here for decades. No family, no visitors, just me." She paused. Sometimes at night she whispers a name in her sleep. Cole. His heart stopped. He stepped closer. Eleanor slowly lifted her trembling hand and touched his cheek. "Cole," she breathed. "My boy." No one here knew his name. No one. Cole left that night with shaking hands and one terrifying question. If his mother had been alive all along, who had been lying to him his entire life, and why? If this story hooked you, smash that like button and share it with a friend. Subscribe now, because the truth Eleanor's been hiding will change everything. Cole Blackwell got back to his penthouse when the clock struck 11 at night. He didn't turn on the lights. The apartment sank into darkness, with only the glow of Chicago outside the glass spilling in, sketching faint streaks of light across the floor. He shrugged off his coat, tossed it onto the sofa, went straight to the bar, and poured himself a whiskey. He drained the first glass in a single pull. The second one he held in his hand, but he didn't drink. He only stood there, staring out the window, watching the high-rises glitter with their lights far below. His empire was out there. His power stretched across this city. But tonight, none of it meant a thing. Tonight, Cole Blackwell was only an orphaned child, asking himself why his mother was still alive. He set the whiskey down and began to pace the living room. His footsteps landed in a steady rhythm on the wood floor. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't lie down. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that woman's face, Eleanor, her trembling hand against his cheek, her rough, hoarse voice saying his name. "Cole, my son." He stopped in front of the oak cabinet in the corner. It was the only piece he'd taken with him from Aunt Trish's old house when he moved out on his own at 18 years old. He opened the bottom drawer, rummaged beneath old papers, and pulled out a small black velvet box. Inside, there was only one thing: a photograph. The photo had yellowed with time, its corners slightly curled, but the image was still clear. A young woman was smiling, long brown hair, bright eyes, and a small beauty mark beneath the outer corner of her left eye. This was the only photograph of his mother that Cole had. Aunt Trish had given it to him when he was 10. After hundreds of times he'd begged to see his mother's face. She said it was all that was left. Cole lifted the photograph and moved closer to the window where there was light. He stared at the face in the picture, then closed his eyes, trying to recall Eleanor's face at the nursing home, the shape of her eyes, the way she tilted her head when she looked at him, and the beauty mark, the small beauty mark beneath the outer corner of her left eye, the same in a way that made his skin crawl. Cole opened his eyes, his hand shaking around the photograph. 35 years. Aunt Trish had said his mother died 35 years ago, in a car accident, along with his father. He remembered the nights when he was little, lying in bed and asking Aunt Trish about his mother. What did my mother look like? Did my mother love me? Why did my mother have to die? Aunt Trish's answers were always cold and brief. Your mother is dead. Don't ask again. Asking only makes it hurt more. Then she would close his bedroom door, leaving Cole alone with questions that had no answers. He remembered the hollow feeling every afternoon after school. Other kids had mothers waiting at the school gate. They ran to them, hugged them, chattered about their day. Cole, though, walked home alone. No one waited for him. No one asked him how his day had been. Only Aunt Trish, with her icy eyes and her silent dinners. He had lived his whole life believing he was an unlucky child, that he had lost both parents when he was too small to remember. But what if his mother was still alive? What if everything Aunt Trish had ever told him was a lie? Cole set the photograph on the table and took out his phone. The clock read 3 in the morning. He didn't care. He dialed Garrett Stone. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. Garrett's half-asleep voice came through. "Boss, is something wrong?" Cole drew in a deep breath. "I need you to investigate something. The accident that killed my mother 35 years ago. Find everything. Police reports, hospital records, death certificate. All of it." There was a pause on the other end. Garrett had never heard Cole's voice like this. It wasn't cold the way it always was. It trembled like the voice of a man who was afraid. "Yes, boss. I'll do it right away." Garrett hesitated, then asked, "Boss, do you think she's still alive?" Cole didn't answer. He stood by the window, looking out at the city drowned in night, his hands still clenched around the phone. The silence stretched on. And that silence was the answer. The next morning, Cole hadn't slept a single minute. He left the penthouse just as the sun was breaking the horizon, drove through Chicago's still quiet streets, and arrived at Sunny Meadows care home before 8 in the morning. He didn't call ahead. He didn't need anyone's permission. When Cole stepped into the main lobby, Mrs. Caldwell was at the reception desk, checking paperwork. She looked up, and her eyes widened when she recognized the man striding toward her. "Mr. Blackwell," she stammered. "I didn't know you were coming today." Cole didn't slow down. "Where's Eleanor's room?" "Mrs." Caldwell pointed toward the left corridor, her face full of questions but not daring to ask another one. Everyone knew who Cole Blackwell was. Everyone knew you didn't ask questions of a man like him. Cole walked down the hallway, counting each door number until he stopped in front of room 23. The door was slightly open. He didn't go in right away. He stood outside and looked through the gap. Inside, Eleanor was sitting up in bed, her back supported by pillows, and the young woman from yesterday, Harper, was seated beside her with a bowl of porridge in her hands. Harper spooned up small bites, blew on them to cool them, then gently brought them to Eleanor's mouth. The older woman ate slowly. Sometimes the porridge slipped from the corner of her lips, and Harper patiently wiped it away with a soft cloth. "Come on, Eleanor, just one more spoonful," Harper said, her voice gentle, as if she were coaxing a child. "The weather's beautiful today. After you finish, I'll wheel you out to the garden so you can sit for a while." Eleanor didn't answer. She only looked at Harper with her clouded eyes, but there was something in that gaze. Trust. Calm. As if Harper were the only person left in this world she could still lean on. Cole stood there watching for a few more minutes. He'd met every kind of person in his life. The greedy ones, the traitors, the ones who'd kill for money without blinking. But he rarely saw anyone treat a stranger with that kind of patience and tenderness. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Harper looked up, and her green eyes immediately sharpened with caution. She set the bowl down on the table and rose to her feet, as if she were preparing to shield Eleanor from any threat. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice not friendly at all. "I want to talk," Cole said, "about Eleanor." Harper studied him for a moment, then glanced at Eleanor. The old woman didn't seem to realize Cole was there. She was staring out the window, her eyes far away. "Who are you?" Harper asked. "Yesterday you came in here, looked at her like you'd seen a ghost, then you walked out. Today you show up again. What do you want from her?" Cole didn't answer her question. Instead, he asked one of his own. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years. "Why?" "Why what? Why do you work in a place like this? Low pay, bad conditions, taking care of people the whole world has forgotten. You could work at a bigger hospital, make more money." Harper met Cole's eyes. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't seem afraid, even though she knew exactly who the man in front of her was. "I grew up in the foster system," she said, her voice as even as if she were talking about the weather. "Orphaned when I was 15 years old. My parents died in an accident, and I was pushed from one home to another until I turned 18 and had to take care of myself. I know what it feels like to be abandoned." She looked toward Eleanor. "Eleanor needs me more than anyone here. No one else wants to care for her because she screams at night, wakes up the whole floor with her nightmares. But I understand. I understand what it feels like when the pain is too big to keep inside anymore." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You aren't scared?" he asked. "Scared of what?" "Scared of those screams. Scared of an old woman who's lost her mind. Scared you'll get stuck in a place like this for the rest of your life." Harper gave a faint smile. I lost everything a long time ago, Mr. Blackwell. There's nothing left to be afraid of. Cole looked at her, and an unfamiliar respect rose in his chest. This girl was far stronger than her slender frame suggested. Her nightmares? Cole asked. What does she scream about? Harper hesitated. A lot of things. Sometimes she calls your name, Cole. Sometimes she calls another name. Cole felt his heart tighten. What name? Trish, Harper said. She says Trish with fear, like that person is the biggest nightmare she's ever had. She often screams, "Don't, Trish, please don't do it. Don't take my son." Cole felt like someone had just driven a fist into his chest. Trish, Aunt Trish, the woman who had raised him, the woman who told him his mother was dead. Just then, Eleanor turned her head. Her clouded eyes suddenly brightened when she saw Cole. She reached out and seized his wrist with surprising strength for someone so old and frail. "Cole," she whispered. "You're here. I knew you'd come." Cole dropped to his knees beside the bed, bringing his face level with hers. "You remember me." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I remember you every day. Every night. For 35 years, I haven't stopped thinking about you." Then she pulled Cole closer, leaned toward his ear, and whispered with urgent force, "You have to be careful with Trish. She took you from me. She locked me in this hell. Don't believe her, Cole. Never believe her." Cole didn't even have time to react before Eleanor suddenly convulsed. Her eyes rolled back. Her body shuddered violently. Her mouth opened as if she wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Harper rushed in at once. "Eleanor, calm down. Listen to me," she said, gripping Eleanor's shoulders, then turning to Cole. "Get out. Now." Then she slapped the nurse call button on the wall. Cole stood, backing toward the door. He watched Eleanor thrashing in panic, watched Harper fighting to soothe her, and he felt rage begin to boil through his veins. Aunt Trish, the woman who had raised him for 35 years, the woman who had cried when she told him about his mother's death, the woman who had held him every time he cried because he missed his mother. It had all been lies. Cole's hand curled into a fist, and inside him, one question thundered like a storm. "Aunt Trish, what did you do to my mother?" 2 days passed like 2 years for Cole. He didn't go back to the care home, because he knew he needed to calm down. He needed the truth before he acted. And that truth was in Garrett's hands. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Garrett Stone walked into Cole's penthouse carrying a thick leather briefcase. The 38-year-old man's face was usually cold and unreadable, but today there was something different. Garrett looked like someone who had just seen something he couldn't believe. Cole was standing by the window, a familiar glass of whiskey in his hand. He turned when he heard the door. "What did you find?" Garrett set the briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside was a heavy stack of files, old yellowed papers mixed in with fresh printouts. "You should sit down, boss," Garrett said, his voice grave. "I don't need to sit. Talk." Garrett took a deep breath. "I checked every traffic accident record in Illinois for the time your aunt claimed. 35 years ago, March, the mountain road north of Chicago." He flipped open a folder. "There's nothing. There wasn't any accident tied to the name Richard Blackwell or Eleanor Blackwell. No police report, no hospital record, nothing at all." Cole set his whiskey down on the table. "Keep going. I checked for a death certificate," Garrett said. "Eleanor Blackwell. No death certificate was ever issued for that woman in the national system. Not in Illinois, not in any other state. According to official records, Eleanor Blackwell never died." Cole felt as if someone had poured ice water into his veins. He'd suspected it, he'd guessed it, but hearing it confirmed still left him reeling. What else? Garrett turned to another set of documents, older pages stamped with a hospital seal. "This is the biggest find. 35 years ago, at the exact time your aunt talked about the accident, there was a woman named Eleanor Blackwell admitted to St. Margaret Psychiatric Hospital." Cole moved closer to the table, staring down at the pages. He saw his mother's name printed there in stark clarity. Eleanor Marie Blackwell. Admission date, reason for admission, and a signature at the bottom. "Who signed the admission papers?" Cole asked, even though he already knew the answer. Garrett pointed to the signature line. "Patricia Blackwell, listed as next of kin." Cole stared at that familiar signature, Aunt Trish's signature, the same one he'd seen hundreds of times, on birthday checks, on school permission slips, on legal documents when he was a kid. What was the reason for admission? Garrett read aloud from the file. Severe psychiatric disturbance, paranoia, suicidal ideation, and intent to harm her young child. Cole let out a laugh, but it was a cold sound with no joy in it. Intent to harm her young child. She said my mother wanted to kill me. Garrett nodded. That's what the record says. But boss, I spoke to a few people who worked at St. Margaret back then. Most are retired or gone now. But I found one former nurse. She remembers Eleanor. What did she say? She said Eleanor wasn't crazy, Garrett replied. She said Eleanor cried every day, begged to see her son. She said Eleanor was completely lucid, only desperate because she'd been separated from her child. Cole gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. What else? Garrett turned to another stack of papers. Assets, he said. After Richard Blackwell died of heart disease 35 years ago, the family's entire estate was transferred. Cole looked at the numbers, the legal language, the sale documents. The family home in the Chicago suburbs, where Cole had been born, had been sold just 6 months after Eleanor was committed. Richard Blackwell's savings account, a substantial sum at the time, had been emptied. Shares in the Blackwell family business, the company Cole's grandfather had built, had been transferred. Everything went to one person, Patricia Blackwell, listed as the legal guardian of Cole Blackwell, the only son of Richard and Eleanor. Garrett went on. Your aunt sold the house, drained the savings, and took control of the company. She took everything. Cole read each page, his face turning to ice. Not a single muscle moved, but his hands shook. Shook so badly the papers trembled with them. Boss, Garrett said after a stretch of silence, if all of this is true, then your Aunt Cole cut him off, his voice cold as steel. She pushed my mother into hell so she could take everything. She locked a sane woman in a psychiatric hospital for 35 years. She told me my mother was dead while my mother was alive, screaming my name every night. She stole my childhood. She stole my mother. She stole my family. All for money. He stood and walked to the window. Chicago spread out below him, millions of lights flickering in the dusk. Cole had built his empire with his bare hands. He'd believed he had nothing, that his parents were dead and had left him alone in the world. But the truth was, he'd had everything. He'd had a mother. He'd had an inheritance. He'd had a family. And Aunt Trish had stolen it all. What are you going to do, boss? Garrett asked. Cole turned back, his eyes dark as an abyss. Find Aunt Trish's current address, and get the car ready. I need to talk to her. Patricia Blackwell's mansion sat in the northern suburbs of Chicago, where the wealthy lived in sprawling homes with lush green lawns and spotless white fences. Cole hadn't been here in years. As a boy, he'd lived here with Aunt Trish until he was 18 and struck out on his own. After that, he'd only come back for the major holidays, and even those visits had grown fewer as the years slipped by. Cole's sleek black car rolled to a stop at the gate at 4 in the afternoon. He didn't call ahead. He didn't want to give Trish time to prepare. Garrett stayed in the driver's seat, watching Cole in the rearview mirror. Do you want me to come in with you, boss? No, Cole answered flatly. Wait here. He stepped out and walked up the stone path to the front door. The house looked exactly as he remembered, maybe even more lavish than before. The rose bushes were trimmed into perfect shapes. A marble angel stood in the center of the garden, and the newest model Mercedes sat in the open garage. Every one of those things had been bought with his family's money, his father's money, money that should have belonged to him and to his mother. Cole pressed the doorbell. A few seconds later, the door opened, and Patricia Blackwell appeared. She was 62, but she looked far younger, thanks to cosmetic procedures and an expensive skincare regimen. Her brown hair was neatly dyed, her makeup flawless, and her smile bright when she recognized the man on her doorstep. Cole, Trish cried, her voice bursting with delight. Oh my God, why didn't you call first? I'm so happy. Come in, come in. She lifted her arms to hug him, but Cole stepped past her and walked straight inside, not returning the gesture. Trish faltered for a beat, then quickly recovered, shut the door, and followed him into the living room. Cole stood in the center of the room, his gaze sweeping over every detail. The Italian leather sofa, the crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling, the oil painting of a European landscape on the wall, one he knew cost at least as much as an apartment. The liquor cabinet stocked with expensive French wines, all of it bought with money Trish had taken. Sit down, Trish said, still wearing that smile. "Let me make you some tea. Or do you want something else to drink?" "No, thanks." Cole sat on the sofa across from Trish. He looked straight into her eyes, his face empty of expression. "I came because I have something to ask you." Trish sat down, a flicker of unease passing through her eyes before it vanished. "What is it, sweetheart?" "How did my mother die, Aunt Trish?" The sudden question made Trish blink, but she'd lied so many times that the story flowed out as naturally as breathing. "Why are you asking about that?" she asked gently. "You know, a car accident. Your parents went away for the weekend. Drove up into the mountains north of Chicago. The roads were slick. The car lost control, went over the edge. They both died instantly. I already told you all this." Cole didn't speak. He took out his phone, opened a photograph, and held it out for Trish to see. It was a picture he'd taken of Eleanor at the care home, sitting in her wheelchair by the window. "Then who is this woman?" Trish stared at the photo, and Cole saw the precise moment she recognized her. It lasted only an instant. A blink. A tiny twitch at the corner of her mouth. But Cole had been trained to read people. He knew what fear looked like. "She recognized me," Cole went on, his tone as calm as if he were talking about the weather. "She said my name. She said I'm her son." Trish set the phone down on the table, forcing her face into composure. "It's probably just someone with the same name, honey. Eleanor is a common name. Or maybe she saw you on TV. You're famous. Everyone knows your face. She's old. She's confused. She just got mixed up." Cole pulled a file from the inside pocket of his coat and laid it on the table. He opened it, revealing yellowed pages stamped with the seal of St. Margaret Hospital. "Then how do you explain this?" Trish looked down at the papers. This time, she couldn't hide it. Her face went pale. Her hands trembled. Cole pointed to the signature at the bottom. "Your signature, 35 years ago. Committing Eleanor Blackwell to a psychiatric hospital." Silence stretched out. The room seemed to freeze for a few seconds. Then Trish began to cry. Not quiet tears, but loud sobs. Her cheeks soaked as the tears ran down. "All right," she blurted through the crying. "Your mother didn't die in an accident. But I lied because I was trying to protect you, Cole. You have to understand." Cole said nothing. He only watched her cry. "Your mother was sick, Cole," Trish said, her voice thick with grief. "She had severe depression after she gave birth to you. I don't know why. Maybe the delivery was hard. Maybe it ran in the family, some kind of inherited illness. But she changed completely after you were born. She was paranoid. She was terrified. She thought everyone wanted to hurt her and hurt her baby." Trish wiped her tears and looked at Cole with pleading eyes. "One time, when you were only a few months old, I came to visit and found her holding you in the bathroom. She said she had to protect you from this cruel world. She said the only way was to take you with her. She was trying to strangle you, Cole. She wanted to kill you and then kill herself. I had to stop her. I had to take her away to save you." A chill slid down Cole's spine. The story sounded plausible. It explained everything. And yet something in it felt wrong. She'd hidden this for 35 years. "You kept this from me for 35 years, he said slowly. "You didn't think I had the right to know the truth. I didn't want you living in that darkness," Trish cried. "I didn't want you growing up thinking your own mother tried to kill you. I loved you like my own son, Cole. I only wanted to protect you." Cole stared at the woman sobbing in front of him, the woman who had raised him for 35 years, the woman who had fed him, clothed him, sent him to school. But another question rang in his mind, louder than everything else. "If you loved me that much, why did you take all my family's money?" Cole stood and walked toward the door. "You don't believe me?" Trish called after him, her voice desperate. "After everything I've done for you, you don't believe me." Cole stopped at the threshold but didn't turn around. "I don't know who to believe yet," he said, his voice cold. "But I'm going to find the truth." He stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind him. In his head, Trish's crying was gone. There was only one image left. Eleanor's eyes when she looked at him at the care home. Eyes full of love, full of longing, full of suffering. Those weren't the eyes of a madwoman. Those weren't the eyes of someone who'd once tried to kill her child. They were the eyes of a mother who had waited for her son for 35 years. 3 days had passed since Cole confronted Aunt Trish. 3 days in which Harper Wells had no idea her quiet, steady life was about to be turned upside down. That morning, Harper went to Sunny Meadows like she always did. She fed Eleanor breakfast, brushed her hair, read her a few pages from an old book she'd found at the library. Eleanor was quieter than usual today, her clouded eyes fixed on the distance beyond the window as if she were waiting for someone. Harper knew she was thinking about Cole. Since that man had appeared, Eleanor seemed different. Sometimes she was clearer. Sometimes she sank deeper into painful memories. But no matter what, there was always something new in her eyes, a glimmer Harper had never seen before. The glimmer of hope. Around 2 in the afternoon, as Harper was changing Eleanor's sheets, the phone in her pocket buzzed. She pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. "Stop getting involved with that man, if you don't want to lose your job, and more than that." Harper stared at the words, her brows drawing together. She didn't know who the number belonged to. She didn't even know who that man really was. Cole Blackwell. Maybe. But why would anyone want her to stay away from him? And what did more than that mean? She decided to ignore it. It might have been someone's joke. It might have been a wrong number. She didn't have time to worry about nonsense like that. She had Eleanor to take care of. That night, Harper left Sunny Meadows at 8, after making sure Eleanor was sleeping peacefully. She drove her beat-up old car back to her small apartment on the south side, where she'd lived for 3 years. The place had 1 bedroom, a tiny bathroom, and a little kitchen nook just big enough to boil instant noodles. But it was her home, the only place in the world that belonged to her. Harper climbed the dark stairwell to the 3rd floor, walked down the narrow hall to her door, and she stopped. The door was cracked open. Harper always locked her door. Always. She'd lived alone long enough to know you never got careless about safety. She stood there for a few seconds, her heartbeat quickening. Then she pushed the door and stepped inside. The apartment had been ransacked. The dresser drawers were pulled out, clothes scattered across the floor. The kitchen cabinets hung open, dishes shoved out of place. Her old sofa had been flipped on its side. But strangely, nothing had been taken. Her cheap laptop was still on the table. The little cash she hid in the rice container was untouched. The intruder hadn't come to steal. They'd come to send a message. And the message was lying on her pillow, a white sheet of paper folded in half. Harper picked it up, her hands shaking as she opened it. Final warning. Stay away from Eleanor and Cole Blackwell. Harper felt her legs go weak. She sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the paper in her hand, unable to believe it. Someone had been in her home. Someone had gone through her things. Someone had stood at her bed long enough to place that paper on her pillow, and someone wanted her to stay away from Eleanor. She thought about calling the police. Then she thought again. She'd grown up in the system. She knew how the police worked. They'd come, take notes, promise they'd investigate, and then never come back. She was just a poor nursing aide on the south side. Nobody cared about her. Then she thought of someone else. The man who'd looked at her with that strange intensity when she said she had nothing left to fear. The man who came to the care home every day to look at Eleanor even when she often didn't recognize him. The man someone wanted her to stay away from. Harper grabbed her phone and dialed Cole Blackwell. He answered on the first ring. Harper. His voice was alert even though it was nearly 10 at night. "What is it?" "Someone broke into my apartment," Harper said, forcing her voice steady even as her heart hammered out of control. "They left a warning. They want me to stay away from Eleanor and you." Silence for a second on the other end. Then Cole's voice came through, cold and decisive. "Stay there. Don't go anywhere. I'm coming." Exactly 20 minutes later, a knock sounded at the door. Harper opened it and saw Cole standing there with Garrett and 2 other large men behind him. Cole walked in, his eyes scanning the wrecked apartment with a face that showed nothing, but Harper saw his jaw tighten, saw his hands curl into fists. He was angry, furious. "Who did this?" Cole asked. "I don't know." Harper handed him the note. "But they want me away from Eleanor." Cole read the words, then passed the paper to Garrett. He turned back to Harper. "Are you hurt?" "No. They came while I wasn't here." Cole nodded, then looked at Garrett. "Find her somewhere safe, tonight." Harper straightened. "I don't need help. I can take care of myself." She'd been taking care of herself since she was 15. She didn't need anyone's pity, but Cole met her eyes, and for the first time, Harper saw something different behind that cold stare. "This isn't pity," he said, his voice still hard, but softened by something underneath. "Eleanor needs you, and I'm not letting anyone lay a hand on the person taking care of my mother." Harper looked at him, and she understood. This wasn't Cole Blackwell, the notorious mob boss people whispered about. This was Cole Blackwell, a son who just found his mother after 35 years, and who would do anything to protect her. Harper packed a few changes of clothes and personal items into a small bag. She didn't have much to take. She never had. She followed Cole out to the car, slid into the back seat beside him while Garrett drove. As the car started moving, Harper turned to Cole. "Who do you think is behind this?" Cole stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, eyes as dark as the Chicago night beyond the window. "I only know one person who wants Eleanor to disappear." A week had passed since the night Harper was threatened. Cole had arranged for her to stay in a secure apartment under his control, and he'd assigned guards to watch her 24 hours a day. Harper still went to Sunny Meadows every day to care for Eleanor, but now she no longer went alone. That morning, the clock had barely struck 7 when Cole's phone buzzed. He was sitting in his penthouse, unable to sleep a single hour all night, his thoughts spinning without mercy. When Harper's name flashed on the screen, he answered immediately. "Come right now." Harper's voice came through, and there was something different in its cadence. "Eleanor is clearer than she's ever been. She wants to talk." Cole didn't ask anything else. He hung up, changed clothes, and drove to Sunny Meadows in less than half an hour. When he reached the familiar hallway leading to room 23, Harper was waiting at the door. She looked at him with an expression that was both sorrowful and hopeful at once. "She's waiting for you," Harper said softly. "She's different today. I've never seen her like this in 3 years." Cole nodded and pushed the door open. Eleanor was sitting up in bed, her back supported by neatly arranged pillows. She didn't have that faraway, drifting look she'd had on other days. She was sitting straighter, her eyes bright, and the moment she saw Cole step in, those eyes filled with tears. "You're here," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling but each word clear. "My son is here." Cole moved to the bedside and sat in the chair Harper usually took when she fed her. He didn't speak. He only took Eleanor's thin hand and held on tight. Eleanor looked at him, tears sliding down her wrinkled cheeks. "You're so grown now," she said, her voice breaking. "I missed you every day, every night. I wondered how tall you were, whether you were healthy, whether you were happy. I only got to see you when you were so little, when you couldn't walk yet, when you couldn't talk yet, and then they took you from me." Cole felt his throat tighten. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't force a single word out. "I want to tell you," Eleanor said, her voice steadier now, as if she'd waited her entire life for this moment. "I want to tell you everything, so you'll understand why I'm here, why I was separated from you." And then she began to tell him. 37 years earlier, when Eleanor was young, she'd fallen in love with a man named Warren Ashford, the son of one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in Chicago. They met by chance at an art exhibition, and from the first second, they knew they belonged to each other. Warren loved Eleanor with a kind of madness. He promised he'd marry her, promised he'd give her a happy life, but Warren's family refused to accept her. Eleanor was just an ordinary girl. No money, no social standing. She wasn't worthy of their son. They threatened Warren, told him they'd disown him, cut off his inheritance, destroy his career if he didn't leave Eleanor. And Warren chose. Eleanor paused, drawing in a slow breath. "He chose his family," she said, her voice holding no bitterness, only sorrow. "I don't blame him. He was young, he was scared, but he didn't know that back then I was already pregnant with you. I hadn't told him yet. And after he left, I didn't have the courage to tell him anymore." Cole listened, his body gone rigid. Him, Warren Ashford, that was his biological father, not Richard Blackwell, the man he'd always believed was his father. "A year later, I met Richard," Eleanor went on. "Richard Blackwell. He knew I had a child, knew I'd been abandoned by someone else. But he didn't care. He loved me. He married me. And he loved you, as if you were his own. He was a good man, Cole. He loved you so much." She stopped, her eyes drifting as if she were living inside an old memory. "But Trish, Richard's sister, never accepted me. She hated me because she thought I'd stolen her brother from her. She always looked for ways to make my life harder, always spoke badly about me behind my back. But while Richard was alive, she didn't dare go too far." "And when Richard died?" Cole asked, his voice rough. "When Richard died of heart disease, Trish saw her chance," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with pain. "She told everyone I was crazy. She said I was depressed after losing my husband, that I was suicidal, that I was dangerous to you. She forged papers, bribed doctors, and put me in a psychiatric hospital. I begged, I screamed, but no one believed me. They said I was insane. They said I was delusional. They injected me with drugs that made it impossible to think. Eleanor's tears kept falling, but she kept going. They locked me in a white room. 4 white walls. No window. No sunlight. I wasn't allowed to see you. I wasn't allowed to know how you were. Every day I asked about you, and they told me you'd been raised by someone else, that you would never come back. They told me I should forget you. She squeezed Cole's hand tighter. 35 years, Cole. I waited for you for 35 years. I never stopped calling your name. Every night, before I went to sleep, I called your name. Cole, my son. I didn't know where you were, how you were living, but I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. Cole felt his eyes burn. He hadn't cried since he was a child. He'd built steel around his heart for years and years. But now, sitting in front of the mother he'd thought was dead for so long, hearing her speak of the 35 years of hell she'd survived, that steel shattered. Eleanor lifted her trembling hand and stroked her son's face. I'm not crazy, Cole, she whispered. I was never crazy. I was just a mother whose child was stolen. And Cole, the most powerful man in Chicago, the mafia boss the whole city feared, a man who had never cried in front of anyone, bowed his head onto his mother's shoulder and wept like a child. He cried for the 35 years he'd lived without her. He cried for the nights he'd lain alone, asking why she had to die. He cried for all the lies he'd believed his entire life. And he cried because at last, after 35 years, he'd found his mother again. Eleanor held her son, smoothing his hair the way she'd done when he was small. Mother and son sat there, holding each other and crying, in the small room of the shabby care home. Outside the door, Harper leaned against the wall, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She'd heard everything, and now she understood. Eleanor wasn't crazy. She never had been. She was only a mother who had waited for her son for 35 years in hell. And now, finally, her son had come. After that morning at Sunny Meadows, Cole knew he couldn't wait any longer. He'd heard the truth from his mother's own mouth. He'd seen the pain in her eyes as she spoke of 35 years of hell, and he wasn't going to let Trish walk away unpunished. That very afternoon, Cole called Preston Hale, one of the best attorneys in Chicago, and a man who had handled more than a few complicated matters for him in the past. Preston came to Cole's penthouse that night, listened as Cole laid out the entire story, then studied every file Garrett had gathered. When Preston left, he carried a clear assignment: prepare the case to sue Patricia Blackwell for unlawful imprisonment, falsifying medical records, and theft of assets. But Cole didn't know that Trish had eyes and ears everywhere. She'd built her network over 35 years, bought the people who could be bought, and kept watch on Cole's every move from a distance. Only 2 days after the meeting with Preston, Trish knew everything. She knew Cole was preparing to take her to court. She knew he had enough evidence to put her in prison. And she knew that if she didn't act now, everything she'd built over the past 35 years would collapse. Trish wasn't the kind of woman who sat still and waited to die. She reached out to a group of people she'd hired before for dirty work. Not men from Cole's underworld, but outsiders, the kind who worked for money and didn't ask questions. She promised them a large sum if they could solve her problem. And that problem was Cole Blackwell. They began to watch Cole, his schedule, the places he went, the people he met. They waited for the right moment. And that moment came one night when Cole left Preston Hale's office after a long meeting. Chicago's streets were quiet at 11 at night. Cole's black car was moving down the main avenue when an SUV suddenly shot out of an alley and cut across the lane in front of them. Cole slammed the brakes. Before he could react, another vehicle boxed them in from behind. Garrett, in the driver's seat, pulled his gun instantly. "Boss, get down." The doors of the vehicles outside flew open, and 3 figures moved toward them. But they'd underestimated Cole Blackwell. He wasn't an amateur. He'd lived in the underworld long enough to know how to handle situations like this. And he didn't travel alone. Garrett and 2 of Cole's guards dealt with it cleanly in less than 3 minutes. No gunshots, no blood, only a few men groaning on the pavement, and one clear message: don't play games with Cole Blackwell. By the time the police arrived, Cole was long gone. Sitting in the car on the way back to the penthouse, he thought it through. Who knew he was meeting the lawyer tonight? Garrett knew, Preston knew, and Trish, somehow, knew too. Cole clenched his teeth. Aunt Trish had crossed the line. But Trish didn't stop there. The next morning, while Cole was still dealing with the aftermath of the ambush, a luxury car pulled up outside Sunny Meadows care home. Patricia Blackwell stepped out, dressed impeccably in expensive clothes, walking as if she owned the world. She pushed through the front doors and demanded to see Mrs. Caldwell at once. Mrs. Caldwell hurried out, her face tight with worry when she saw who was standing there. "Mrs. Blackwell, is something wrong? I want to transfer Eleanor Blackwell to another facility," Trish said, her voice cold and final. "This place isn't qualified to care for her. I've found somewhere better." Mrs. Caldwell hesitated. "But ma'am, transfers take time, and we need the consent of the legal guardian." "I'm the only family she has left," Trish cut in, her tone sharp as a blade. "Get the paperwork ready. I'm taking her today." Mrs. Caldwell knew exactly who Patricia Blackwell was. She had money, power, connections. Standing up to her was just asking for trouble. "Mrs." Caldwell nodded and started to turn to prepare the forms. But when Trish headed down the hallway toward Eleanor's room, she ran into an obstacle. Harper Wells stood squarely in front of the door to room 23, arms crossed over her chest, eyes steady and unafraid. "You're not touching Eleanor," Harper said, her voice calm but firm. Trish stopped, looking the young woman up and down with contempt. "Who do you think you are, stopping me? You're just a cheap little nurse. I can have you fired with one phone call." Harper didn't move an inch. She'd lost everything when she was a child. She'd survived the foster system, the years of loneliness and pain. She wasn't afraid of an old rich woman and her empty threats. "I'm the only one who's taken care of her for 3 years, Harper said, her voice unwavering. "When nobody wanted to go near her, I was here. When she screamed at night, I was the one who soothed her. You want to move her? Step over me." Trish moved closer, her eyes blazing with fury. "I'll make you lose your job," she hissed through her teeth. "You'll never work in this city again. I'll ruin your life, you stupid girl." Harper looked straight into Trish's eyes without blinking. "I lost everything a long time ago, Mrs. Blackwell," she said, her tone as mild as if she were talking about the weather. "My parents died when I was 15. I grew up with no family, no home, nothing at all. You don't have anything left to take from me, and I'm not afraid of you." Trish was about to say something when a voice sounded behind them. "What are you doing here, Aunt Trish?" Trish spun around. Cole stood at the far end of the hallway, Garrett close behind him. His eyes were ice cold, his face blank, but there was something in the way he stood, the way he looked, that made the air itself seem to harden. Trish's face went pale. Cole walked toward her, each step landing in an even rhythm on the tile. He stopped right in front of Trish, looking down at the woman who had raised him, the woman who had lied to him his whole life. "Touch my mother or Harper one more time," Cole said, his voice low and dangerous, like the growl of a predator, "and I'll show you why people are afraid of the name Blackwell." 2 days after the confrontation at Sunny Meadows, Cole called an important meeting in his private office on the top floor of a building he owned. Garrett Stone was there, along with Preston Hale, the attorney Cole had trusted with this case. And there was one more person Cole had decided to invite: Harper Wells. The conference room was spacious, with glass walls that looked out over all of Chicago. Preston sat at the head of the table, a thick stack of files in front of him, the result of days of relentless work. He opened the meeting with the firm voice of a man who'd fought in courtrooms for 30 years. "I've reviewed every document Garrett provided," Preston said, flipping through the pages. "We have solid grounds to sue Patricia Blackwell on 3 primary charges. First, unlawful imprisonment. Eleanor Blackwell was committed to a psychiatric hospital without legitimate medical cause and kept there for 35 years. Second, falsification of medical records. Eleanor's admission paperwork shows irregularities, and we have a former nurse willing to testify that Eleanor was fully lucid when she was taken in. Third, theft of assets. After Richard Blackwell died, the entire estate was transferred to Trish under the label of Cole's legal guardian, but in reality, she sold everything and used the money for herself." Cole nodded, his face unreadable. "What are our chances of winning?" Preston set his pen down and looked Cole straight in the eye. "If we can prove Eleanor was lucid when she was committed, and that Trish deceived the medical system, she'll go to prison. There's no doubt about that. But that's the problem. We need witnesses. Someone who can stand in court and say Eleanor wasn't insane. Preston turned to another page. The former nurse Garrett found has agreed to testify, but she's over 70, and her memory isn't what it used to be. Trish's lawyers will tear her apart on the stand. We need someone who can speak to Eleanor's current condition. Someone who knows her well. Someone who can show she's lucid. Silence settled over the room. Then Harper spoke. I'll testify. Every head turned toward her. Harper sat with her back straight, her green eyes fixed on Preston without a flicker of hesitation. I've cared for Eleanor for 3 years, she said, her voice calm and clear. I know her. I know her better than anyone in that facility. She drifts sometimes. She gets lost in memories, but she isn't insane. She remembers everything. She remembers her son's name, the lullaby she used to sing to him, Cole's birthday. Harper paused, as if she were reliving the long nights beside Eleanor's bed. Every night, before she falls asleep, she holds my hand and says, "Don't let them take my son." I thought she was delirious. I thought it was just meaningless talk from an old woman who'd lost her mind, but now I understand. She wasn't delirious. She was reliving memory. She was remembering the day they stole her son from her. 35 years, and she still hasn't forgotten. Preston nodded, clearly pleased. Your testimony will be extremely valuable. You're her direct caregiver. You have 3 years of observation and interaction with Eleanor. The court will have to listen to you. Cole looked at Harper. She sat there, spine straight, eyes bright, ready to stand up against Patricia Blackwell for an elderly woman she wasn't even related to by blood. You know Trish will retaliate if you testify, Cole asked, his voice serious. She warned you once already. If you take the stand against her, she won't stop. Harper turned to Cole. She didn't back down. I know, she said. But Eleanor deserves justice. She's been silenced for 35 years. 35 years where nobody believed her. Nobody listened to her. Nobody stood on her side. I'm not going to let her be silenced for one more day. Cole studied the young woman in front of him. She had nothing. No family, no money, no power. But she had what many rich and powerful people didn't: courage and integrity. The meeting ended after an hour. Preston gathered the files and left, promising he'd finalize the complaint within a week. Garrett followed to arrange security for the coming court battle. Only Cole and Harper remained in the wide room. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass, casting warm gold bands across the floor. Cole stood by the window, looking down at the city below. Then he turned back to Harper. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer than usual, so unlike the coldness he normally wore. Harper gave a faint smile. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "We haven't won." The first hearing took place on a Monday morning at the federal courthouse in Chicago. The sky was a hard, dull gray, as if it could feel the tension inside that old, imposing building. Cole Blackwell sat at the plaintiff's table, Preston Hale beside him with a thick stack of files. He wore a black suit, his face as cold as ice, but inside his chest his heart was pounding. This was the most important battle of his life, not for money or power, but for his mother. On the other side, Patricia Blackwell sat with a team of 3 of the most expensive attorneys in the city. She wore an elegant dark blue outfit, her hair swept into a neat twist, looking like a respectable society woman, not someone who had kept her sister-in-law locked away for 35 years. She stared straight ahead, never once glancing at Cole. The judge struck the gavel, and the hearing began. Preston Hale stood, walked to the lectern, and began to speak. "Your Honor, we are here today to seek justice for a woman who has been wrongfully confined for 35 years. Eleanor Blackwell was committed to Street Margaret Psychiatric Hospital in 1989 by her own sister-in-law, Patricia Blackwell. The admission file contains multiple irregularities. No independent physician confirmed Mrs. Blackwell's mental state. There is only Patricia Blackwell's signature as next of kin." Preston turned to the next page. "Moreover, there is no evidence that Eleanor Blackwell was truly dangerous. There are no police reports, no prior medical history of psychiatric illness, and notably, immediately after Eleanor was taken away, the entire Blackwell estate, including the family home, the savings accounts, and the shares in the family company, was transferred to Patricia Blackwell. We believe this was a calculated scheme to seize assets and remove Eleanor Blackwell from her son's life." Cole watched the judge's reaction. The man took careful notes, his face giving away nothing, but at least he was listening. Then it was Trish's attorney's turn. A silver-haired, middle-aged man with an elegant bearing stood with a confident smile. "Your Honor, what the plaintiff has presented is speculation and baseless accusation. We have clear evidence that Eleanor Blackwell suffered from severe mental illness, and that placing her in the hospital was necessary to protect her and those around her." He produced a thick file. "This is Eleanor Blackwell's medical record from St. Margaret. It contains detailed documentation of violent, uncontrollable behavior throughout her treatment. She assaulted staff. She harmed herself. This is not a lucid woman wrongfully imprisoned. This is a psychiatric patient who required specialized care." Cole clenched his jaw. Those records were fabricated. He knew it, proving it was something else entirely. Trish's attorney continued. "We also have a witness, Mrs. Martha Jenkins, a former nurse at St. Margaret, will testify to Eleanor Blackwell's condition at the time of admission." An elderly woman with gray hair was led to the stand. She testified that Eleanor frequently screamed, broke things, and once attacked a staff member so badly the person needed several stitches. Cole watched her, knowing she was lying, or had been bought. But testimony from a nurse carried weight with a court. Then Trish was called to the stand. She walked with the posture of a woman in pain, as if every step were heavy. When she sat, she dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, tears already falling. "I loved Eleanor like my own sister," Trish said, her voice thick with emotion. "When my brother, Richard, married her, I was so happy. We were like a real family. But after she gave birth to Cole, Eleanor changed. She fell into severe depression, paranoia, believing everyone wanted to harm her and harm her son." Trish began to sob harder. "One day, I came to visit and I found Eleanor holding Cole in the bathroom. He was 2 years old then. She was strangling him, whispering that she had to protect him from this cruel world by taking him with her. I had to rip Cole out of her arms. I had to have her committed to save my nephew." She looked toward the judge, her eyes swimming. "I hid this for all these years because I didn't want Cole living in that darkness. I didn't want him to know his own mother once tried to kill him. I only wanted to protect my family. I only wanted Cole to have a normal life." Cole watched Trish cry on the witness stand and felt sick. She was too good, too convincing. The judge nodded. His expression softened with sympathy. Cole knew that wasn't good. The judge announced he would order a psychiatric evaluation of Eleanor before issuing any final ruling. It was a heavy blow. If the doctors assigned to the evaluation were bought by Trish, it would all be over. Then it was Harper's turn to testify. She stepped onto the stand with calm composure, even though Cole knew she was shaking inside. "I've cared for Eleanor for 3 years, Harper said, her voice clear and steady. "Every day, I feed her, bathe her, talk with her. I know her. She drifts sometimes. She gets lost in memories. But she isn't insane. She remembers everything about her son. His name, his birthday, the lullaby she used to sing to him. Every night, she says Cole's name before she falls asleep. Eleanor isn't crazy. She's been isolated, abandoned, treated like she was invisible for 35 years. But she isn't crazy." But Trish's attorney objected immediately. "Your Honor, this witness is only a nursing aide. She has no medical credentials. She is not a psychiatrist. She lacks the expertise to assess a patient's mental condition. What she is offering is personal impression, not scientific evidence." The judge nodded, accepting that argument. Cole felt as if his heart had dropped into a pit. The hearing was recessed to await the results of the psychiatric evaluation. Cole walked out of the courtroom, his face still ice cold, but anxiety tearing through him. Everything was tilting toward Trish. She had records. She had witnesses. She had tears. Cole had the truth, and no one believed him. Harper followed him into the hallway. She stopped beside him, guilt written all over her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "My testimony wasn't enough. I didn't help." Cole turned to look at her, and then, without thinking, he took her hand. His hand was large and warm, closing firmly around Harper's smaller one. "You did everything you could," he said, his voice softer than usual. "We haven't lost. I'll find a way." A week passed like a year for Cole. He barely slept for days, his mind spinning endlessly around the trial, around Trish's testimony, around the way the judge had nodded while she cried. He'd prepared for every scenario, and still, he couldn't find a way to turn the tide. Until that morning, 1 hour before the second hearing began, Preston Hale came to Cole in the courthouse waiting room. The attorney looked nothing like he usually did. Instead of that tight, anxious face, he wore a smile Cole hadn't seen once since the lawsuit began. "What is it?" Cole asked, his brow furrowing. "Someone contacted me last night," Preston said, trying to keep his voice steady, but the excitement leaked through. "He said he has evidence. He wants to testify for us." Cole straightened. "Who?" Preston drew a deep breath before answering. "The doctor who signed your mother's commitment papers 35 years ago." Cole felt as if someone had driven a fist into his chest. That doctor. The one who had signed away his mother's freedom. The one who had helped Trish carry out her cruelty. "Why would he testify?" Cole asked, suspicion heavy in his voice. Preston rested a hand on Cole's shoulder. "He's dying. Late-stage cancer. He said he doesn't want to take his guilt to the grave." Court began at 9 a.m. sharp. Trish sat in her usual place with her legal team, her face confident after the first hearing's advantage. She had no idea a storm was about to break. The judge struck the gavel and asked whether either side had anything to add. Preston rose. "Your Honor, the plaintiff requests permission to call a new witness, a witness who can provide decisive evidence in this matter." The judge nodded, granting permission. Preston turned toward the door and spoke clearly. "We call Dr. Bernard Crawford." The courtroom doors opened. An elderly man of 78 stepped inside, his hair white as snow, his back slightly stooped, a cane supporting his slow, careful steps. He wore an old but tidy suit, his face hollowed by the look of someone fighting a terminal illness. Cole glanced toward Trish and saw exactly what he'd been waiting for. Her face went pale as paper. Her eyes widened in horror as she stared at the man walking into the courtroom. She recognized him. She knew who he was. Dr. Crawford was guided to the witness stand and sworn in. He sat, his thin hands resting on the arms of the chair, and began to speak in a slow voice, each word clear. 35 years ago, I was a psychiatrist at St. Minut's, Margaret Hospital," he said, eyes fixed forward as if he were stepping back into the past. "One day in March of that year, a woman named Patricia Blackwell brought her sister-in-law to see me. She said Eleanor Blackwell suffered from severe mental illness and was a danger to herself and to her young child. She demanded that I sign the admission papers to confine Eleanor in the hospital." He paused, drawing in a deep breath as if gathering every ounce of courage to continue. "I examined Eleanor Blackwell. I spoke with her, observed her, evaluated her by every medical standard. And I can confirm one thing. Eleanor Blackwell was fully lucid. She showed no psychiatric symptoms at all. She was simply a woman in grief after losing her husband, terrified of being separated from her son." The courtroom went so still it felt like paper. The judge stopped taking notes and stared at the witness. Trish's attorney stood frozen, as if nailed to the floor. "But Patricia Blackwell gave me a large sum of money," Dr. Crawford continued, his voice trembling with shame. "An amount that, at the time, I could not refuse. I was drowning in debt. My wife was gravely ill and needed treatment I couldn't afford. She said if I signed, she would secure my future. And I signed." He lowered his head, tears beginning to slide down his wrinkled cheeks. "I condemned a completely sane woman to hell for 35 years. I separated a mother from her son. I watched Eleanor beg me every day. She cried. She screamed her son's name. She fell to her knees, pleading for me to let her see Cole even once. And I did nothing. I took the money, and I stayed silent." He lifted his head and looked the judge straight in the eye. "I'm dying. My doctors say I have no more than 3 months, and I don't want to take this guilt into the grave. I don't want to stand before God with hands stained by the suffering of an innocent woman." Preston stepped closer to the witness stand. "Dr. Crawford, do you have any evidence beyond your testimony?" "Yes." Dr. Crawford reached into his coat and pulled out an old notebook and an envelope. "This is my personal journal from 35 years ago. I wrote down everything, including Eleanor Blackwell's true evaluation, showing she was completely lucid. And this is the receipt for the transfer of money from Patricia Blackwell to me at that time." Trish sprang to her feet, her face flushing purple with rage. "He's lying!" she screamed, pointing at Dr. Crawford. "He's old and confused. He doesn't know what he's saying. It's fabricated. It's all fabricated." The judge struck the gavel hard. "Mrs. Blackwell, you will be silent immediately. If you disrupt this courtroom again, I will have you removed." Trish stood there, mouth open, but no words came. Her attorney pulled her back down into her chair, but everyone could see his hands were shaking too. Preston accepted the notebook and the receipt from Dr. Crawford and presented them to the judge. The room fell into a heavy silence as the judge turned page after page, reading each handwritten line from 35 years ago. Cole looked toward Trish, the woman who had raised him, the one who had fed him, clothed him, sent him to school, the one who had told him his mother was dead, the one who had lied to him his entire life. She sat there with a ghost-white face, hands trembling uncontrollably, eyes fixed on the floor, unable to look up. She knew it was over. The palace of lies she'd built over 35 years was collapsing, piece by piece. The judge set the notebook down on the bench and looked straight at Patricia Blackwell. His gaze was stern and cold. "Mrs. Blackwell, do you wish to explain Dr. Crawford's testimony?" he asked, his voice stripped of the warmth he'd shown at the previous hearing. Trish's attorney sprang to his feet, scrambling to salvage what he could. "Your Honor, this witness has admitted he is suffering from late-stage cancer. His condition could affect his memory and cognition. What he is describing may be hallucination or confusion in a dying man. Furthermore, this notebook could have been fabricated. We ask the court not to admit this testimony or this evidence." But the judge shook his head. "This notebook has clear dates, handwriting consistent with a style from 35 years ago. The transfer receipt bears an official bank stamp. This isn't something that can be forged overnight. And I find Dr. Crawford fully lucid in his testimony." He turned back to Trish. "Mrs. Blackwell, I'll ask you again. Do you have anything you wish to say?" Trish sat like a statue. Her face was corpse pale, her hands trembling on the arms of the chair. She stared at the floor, unable to lift her eyes to anyone. Her attorney leaned down and whispered in her ear, probably urging her to stay silent, to wait while they searched for another angle. But Trish didn't listen. She shoved him aside and shot to her feet, her face twisted with rage and desperation, like an animal cornered with no escape. "Fine," she screamed, her voice ringing through the courtroom. "Fine. I did it all. You want the truth, don't you? Then here's the truth." The whole courtroom seemed to freeze. Trish's attorney stood with his mouth open in horror. The judge stopped tapping his gavel. Every person in the room stared at the woman shaking in the middle of the aisle. "Eleanor always got everything," Trish went on, tears spilling down her cheeks. But they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of resentment, of old poison finally surfacing. "Richard loved her more than he loved me, his own sister. From the day she appeared, he only had eyes for her. She stole my brother. She took all his love and made me the extra one in my own family." She stepped out from the row, standing in the center of the courtroom like she was performing a deranged monologue. "When Richard died, I saw my chance. Why should I live in the shadows while she had everything? Why did she get to be a wife, get to be a mother, get to have a happy family, while I had nothing? I told everyone she was crazy. I paid the doctor. I forged the papers. I took Cole, took the house, took the money, took everything." She let out a bitter laugh. "I thought she'd die in that institution. I thought a few years locked in a white room, drugged every day, would kill her. But I never thought she'd live that long. 35 years. Why didn't she just die already?" The courtroom shuddered under the confession. Someone in the back row broke down sobbing. The judge sat rigid, his expression hardening with disgust. Even Trish's own lawyers edged away, as if they didn't want to stand too close to their client anymore. Cole rose slowly and walked toward Trish. Each step landed in the dead silence of the room. He stopped right in front of the woman who had raised him, the woman who had lied to him for his entire life. Trish looked at him, and her eyes suddenly softened, as if she'd only just remembered who was standing there. "Cole," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I raised you. I fed you, clothed you, sent you to school. I loved you like my own son. You have to believe me." Cole looked at her with eyes as cold as ice. There was no blazing hatred, no outburst of rage, only the absolute chill of a man who could see everything clearly now. "You stole 35 years from my mother," he said, his voice low and even. 35 years she lived in hell. 35 years she called my name every night, and nobody heard her. 35 years she waited for a son who never came. He stepped a little closer. "You don't love me. You only needed me to legitimize stealing the estate. Without me, you couldn't take my father's money. I was just your tool. A piece on your board." Cole turned his back on her. "From today on, You're not my aunt anymore." Two police officers approached from the doorway. They walked toward Trish, with shining handcuffs in their hands. "Patricia Blackwell, you are under arrest for unlawful imprisonment, falsifying medical records, and theft of assets," one of them said, his tone cold and professional. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "No," Trish screamed as the cuffs snapped around her wrists. "No, Cole, you can't do this to me. I raised you. I gave you everything." But Cole didn't turn back. He walked toward the back row, where Eleanor sat in her wheelchair with Harper beside her. The old woman was crying. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of release, the tears of someone who had waited for justice for 35 years and had finally lived to see it. Cole knelt beside his mother, taking her frail hands into his. "It's over, Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm taking you home." A week had passed since the day the hearing ended. Patricia Blackwell was being held in custody, awaiting the official trial. The Chicago press covered the story relentlessly. The woman wrongfully confined for 35 years, the cruel sister-in-law who had shoved her into hell. Cole stayed away from the media, refused every interview. He only wanted to be with his mother, to make up for the years that had been stolen. That afternoon, as Cole sat in his penthouse going over legal paperwork, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Hello, Cole Blackwell." An elderly man's voice came through the line. It trembled, as if he were struggling to hold back something powerful. "This is Warren Ashford. I need to see you." Cole went still. Warren Ashford. The name his mother had spoken when she told him the past. The man she had loved 37 years ago. The man who had walked away when his family objected. His biological father. "What do you want?" Cole asked, his voice cold. "I want to meet you," Warren said, his voice urgent. "Please, give me one chance to explain. Just once." Cole was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Send me the address." The next afternoon, Cole went to Warren Ashford's office in downtown Chicago. It was a sleek high-rise, one of the most expensive addresses in the city. He stepped into the elevator, rode to the top floor, where the chairman's office of the Ashford Corporation sat. The room was vast, furnished with expensive taste, glass windows opening onto the entire city. Warren Ashford stood there with his back to the door, looking out at Chicago. When he heard the door open, he turned. Cole studied the man in front of him. 65 years old, hair white as snow, the posture still carrying the authority of a successful businessman. But his eyes were exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in many nights. "Thank you for coming," Warren said, his voice trembling. "Please, sit." Cole didn't sit. He stayed where he was, arms crossed over his chest, staring straight into the eyes of the man who claimed to be his father. "Talk," he said flatly. "I don't have much time." Warren let out a breath, walked to his desk, and sat down. He looked at Cole for a long moment before he began. "I followed the lawsuit in the papers. When I saw the name Eleanor Blackwell, my heart stopped. I couldn't believe it. I thought she'd died long ago." He paused, swallowing hard. 37 years ago, I loved Eleanor. Loved her like I was out of my mind. She was the finest woman I've ever met. But my family wouldn't accept her. They said she wasn't worthy of me. She wasn't in our class. They threatened to disown me, cut off my inheritance, destroy my career if I didn't leave her. Warren lowered his head, shame thick in his voice. And I was a coward. I abandoned Eleanor. I chose my family, my money, my career over the woman I loved. I didn't know she was pregnant. She hadn't had the chance to tell me. He lifted his head, his eyes reddened. After we broke up, Patricia Blackwell contacted me. She said Eleanor and the baby had both died in an accident. I believed her. I didn't verify it. I didn't investigate. I chose the easiest path, to forget everything and move on with my life. Tears began to slide down Warren's wrinkled cheeks. 36 years, Cole. I lost 36 years of being a father, 36 years believing my son was dead, while you were alive, growing up, becoming a man, and I wasn't there for a single moment of your life. He stood, stepping closer to Cole. I know I don't deserve it. I know I don't have the right to ask you to forgive me, but you're my son, my blood, and I want a chance to know you, to be a father. even if it's only for the last years of my life." Cole was silent for a long time. He looked at the man crying in front of him, the man who had given him life but had never been present in it. Then he spoke, his voice cold and even. "You didn't search. You chose to believe someone else instead of confirming it yourself. You chose your comfort over the truth. For 36 years, you lived in luxury while my mother was locked in hell. Did you ever wonder whether Patricia's story was true? Did you ever think to find Eleanor's grave? To find your child's grave?" Warren bowed his head, unable to answer. "I know," he whispered. "I know I was wrong." Cole walked to the door and stopped. He didn't turn when he spoke. "I don't know if I can forgive you, but if you want a chance, go see Eleanor first. She's the one who gets to decide whether you deserve it." Then he stepped out and closed the door behind him. Warren Ashford sat alone in his luxurious office, staring out the window at the city spread below. Tears ran down his face, and for the first time in 36 years, he cried for the woman he had abandoned. After the meeting with Warren Ashford, Cole spent the entire next week searching for a new home. Not for himself, but for his mother. He didn't want a lavish mansion or a polished penthouse. He wanted a real home, a place where his mother could spend what time she had left in peace. In the end, he found it in the western suburbs of Chicago, a 2-story house in a classic style, with a red tile roof and white painted walls. Not too large, not too small, just warm enough for a family. What made Cole choose it was the garden. A wide garden filled with roses, tulips, and lavender. An old oak stood tall in the corner, its broad canopy casting shade over a stone bench beneath it. When Cole stood under that oak for the first time, he knew this was where his mother belonged. Before bringing Eleanor to the new house, Cole met Harper at the secure apartment where she was staying temporarily. He sat across from her, silent for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I bought a house for my mother," he said, "and I want you to work there, as her primary caregiver." Harper looked at him, waiting. Cole went on, "This is my mother's home, and you're the only person she wants by her side. For 3 years, you were the only one who didn't abandon her. She trusts you. She needs you." He paused. "The pay will be 3 times what you made at Sunny Meadows. You'll have your own room in the house, and I want you there." Harper met his gaze with those bright green eyes. "Is this for Eleanor, or for some other reason?" Cole didn't answer. He only gave a faint smile, one Harper had never seen on his cold face before, and that smile said everything. The day Eleanor was brought to her new home was bright with sunlight. The sky was a clear blue, not a single cloud in sight. Cole's sleek black car pulled up to the gate, and he stepped out, opened the back door, and wheeled his mother's chair out. Eleanor sat in the wheelchair, eyes wide as she stared at the house in front of her. She couldn't speak at first. She only stared, as if she didn't dare believe what she was seeing. Cole pushed her through the white-painted wooden gate and down the stone path into the yard. Rose bushes bloomed on either side, their fragrance drifting on the breeze. Birds sang brightly in the branches. The late afternoon sun poured down like honey. Eleanor began to cry. Tears slipped quietly down her wrinkled cheeks. "It's so beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with feeling. "So beautiful, my son." Cole wheeled her into the backyard, to the old oak tree. He positioned her chair beside the stone bench and sat down next to her. The oak's green canopy shaded them both, sunlight filtering through the leaves and scattering dancing patches of light across the ground. Eleanor took her son's hand, her frail fingers trembling in his. 35 years, she said, her voice like it was coming from very far away. "I thought I would die in that place, those white walls, those locked doors, those days without sunlight. I didn't think I would ever see sunlight like this again. I didn't think I would ever smell flowers, hear birdsong, feel wind on my skin. I thought I would die alone, with no one beside me." Cole dropped to his knees beside her chair, his eyes red. The most powerful man in Chicago, the mafia boss the whole city feared, now knelt at his mother's feet like a child. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "I came 35 years too late. I didn't know. I didn't know you were alive. I believed their lies. I lived my whole life thinking you died while you were calling my name every night. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Eleanor lifted her trembling hand and smoothed his hair the way she had when he was small. 35 years ago, she had smoothed the hair of a newborn baby. Now she smoothed the hair of a grown man. But to her, He was still the little boy she'd loved from the first moment she saw him. "You're here," she whispered, a gentle smile blooming on her lips. "That's enough. I don't need anything more. You're all I've waited for these 35 years. And you came." Harper stood at the back door, her shoulder resting against the frame, quietly watching mother and son beneath the oak tree. The golden afternoon light wrapped around them, as if the whole world had narrowed to two people holding each other and weeping. Harper felt her eyes sting. For the first time in her life, Harper Wells felt like she belonged somewhere. Not because of the job, not because of the paycheck, but because this place, this home, these people were slowly becoming the thing she had never had. A family. 2 weeks had passed since Eleanor moved into her new home. She was slowly growing used to life here, to the garden overflowing with flowers, to birdsong each morning, to warm sunlight spilling through the windows. Her health was far better than it had been at Sunny Meadows. Harper cared for her with steady devotion, and Cole came every day. But there was one person who still hadn't appeared, someone Cole knew his mother needed to face if she was ever going to truly close the door on the past. That afternoon, a luxury car pulled up at the gate. Warren Ashford stepped out, dressed neatly in a gray suit, but his face was tight with worry and unease. Cole met him at the door. The two men looked at each other in silence for a moment. Then Cole nodded and led Warren into the backyard, where Eleanor sat in her wheelchair beneath the old oak, her eyes closed, soaking in the late afternoon sun. "She's there," Cole said flatly. "I'll let you two talk alone." Then he stepped aside, standing on the back porch, far enough that he couldn't hear their words, but close enough to watch. Warren drew a deep breath and walked across the grass, moving toward the woman he'd loved 37 years ago. Eleanor opened her eyes at the sound of footsteps. She looked at the man coming toward her, and her eyes widened. 37 years was a very long time. Warren back then had been a young man, handsome, full of fire. Warren now was a 65-year-old man with hair gone white, his back slightly bowed, his eyes heavy with regret. But Eleanor still recognized him. Still recognized the man she had once loved with a kind of madness. Warren reached her wheelchair and dropped to his knees in the grass. He didn't speak at first. He only knelt there, looking up at her with eyes full of tears. Silence stretched out, only the wind moving through the oak leaves, a bird calling somewhere in the garden, and the pulse of two hearts that had once belonged to each other for a lifetime. Finally, Warren spoke. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's been 37 years. I'm sorry. I was a coward. I let my family decide for me. I left you when you needed me most." Eleanor stayed quiet, watching him without a word. Warren went on, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I know that. But I want you to know there wasn't a day I didn't think of you. Not a night I didn't wonder whether you were all right, whether the child I didn't even know existed was happy. I've lived my whole life in regret, and I deserve it." Eleanor looked at him for a long time before she finally spoke, slowly. "I hated you for a long time," she said, her tone so calm it sounded like she was telling someone else's story. "In that white room, I thought of you every night. I asked myself if things would have been different if you'd been there. If you'd chosen me instead of your family, would I have endured 35 years of hell? I hated you down to the bone." Warren bowed his head, tears falling onto the grass. "But now," Eleanor continued, her voice gentler, "I'm too tired to hate anymore. I spent 35 years in pain and hatred. I don't want to spend what time I have left living inside those feelings." She looked toward the porch where Cole stood watching. "Our son grew up well," she said, a faint smile passing across her lips. "Even without you, even without me, he still became a strong, decent man. That's the only thing that matters." Warren lifted his head, tears streaking his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving him life. Thank you for keeping him in your heart for 35 years. Thank you for not giving up." Eleanor said nothing more. She didn't say she forgave Warren, but she didn't send him away either. She only sat there, looking out over the garden in bloom, letting Warren kneel beside her and cry. Cole stood on the porch, watching from a distance. He saw Warren crying. He saw his mother staring outward with a quiet, settled face. He didn't know whether she would ever forgive Warren. Maybe it would take time. Maybe it would never happen. But at least they had met. At least the words that needed to be said had finally been spoken. Cole gave a small nod and went back inside. Maybe, in the end, time would heal everything. A few months had passed since the day Eleanor came to her new home. Life had shifted in ways no one could have imagined. Eleanor was much healthier than before. Her mind was steadier with the people who loved her close by. She no longer had the relentless nightmares she'd suffered at Sunny Meadows. She slept soundly every night, and every morning she woke with a smile when she saw Harper preparing breakfast and Cole arriving as he always did. Patricia Blackwell was sentenced to 15 years in prison for unlawful imprisonment, falsifying medical records, and theft of assets. Cole didn't attend the sentencing. He didn't need to see her face again. That chapter of his life was closed for good. Warren Ashford began visiting Eleanor regularly each week. They didn't return to being lovers the way they were 37 years earlier. Too much time had passed. Too much suffering had happened. But they became friends. Late in life, sharing stories of the past, of what had been lost, and of the son they both loved. One autumn evening, after Eleanor had gone to bed, Cole and Harper sat on the back porch looking out at the garden. Sunset turned the whole sky to gold. The last roses of the season still bloomed, and a soft wind moved through the oak leaves, making a quiet music. Harper spoke first, breaking the silence. "You've changed a lot." Cole turned to look at her. "Changed how?" "When I first met you at Sunny Meadows, I thought you were the coldest man I'd ever seen," Harper said, her green eyes fixed on the distance. "You looked at people like they didn't exist. You spoke like every word could kill. But now you smile more. You talk more. You look like a completely different person." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he looked back out at the garden. "Maybe it's because I've got a reason to smile," he said softly. "Before, I had nothing. I had money, power, an entire empire. But I didn't have a family. I didn't have anyone to come home to. I didn't have anyone to laugh with. Now I've got my mother. And I've got..." Silence. Cole didn't finish the sentence, but Harper understood. She felt her cheeks warm in the fading light. Then Cole went on, his voice nothing like the coldness she'd once known from him. "I'm not good at this," he said, his eyes still on the horizon. "I don't know how to say normal things. I grew up with no one to teach me about feelings, about family, about how to love someone, but you're the first person who's made me want to try." Harper gave a small smile. "I'm not good at it either," she said. "I grew up in foster care. Nobody taught me any of this. I only learned how to survive, not how to live. But here, with Eleanor, with you, I feel like I'm learning all over again." Cole turned to her. Then, without another word, he reached out and took Harper's small hand in his. She didn't pull away. She let him hold on, feeling the warmth from his larger hand sink into her skin. They sat there in silence, fingers interlaced, while the sunset slowly faded. A week later, Eleanor asked both Cole and Harper to come to her room. She was sitting up in bed, her expression serious, but her eyes bright with something joyful. She took Cole's hand in one of hers, Harper's in the other, and looked at them with the gaze of a mother who had lived long enough to understand everything. "I'm old now," she said slowly. "I don't know how much time I have left." Cole started to speak, but Eleanor lifted a hand to stop him. "Let me talk," she continued. "I have only one wish. Stay together. I've seen the way you look at each other. I saw the way you held her hand on the porch the other night. Don't let it slip away the way Warren and I did. Don't wait until 37 years have passed to look back and regret that you didn't hold on to happiness when it was right in front of you." Harper blushed, lowering her head. Cole looked at her, then back at his mother. He smiled and nodded. "Yes, Mom." 1 year later, on a Sunday morning, the whole family sat eating breakfast in the garden under the old oak. The wooden table was set beautifully with toast, fried eggs, fresh fruit, and hot coffee. Eleanor sat in the middle, her silver hair neatly brushed, wearing a pale blue sweater Harper had knitted for her over the course of months. Cole sat to his mother's right, Harper to her left, and Warren sat across from them, older looking this past year, but his eyes brighter, calmer. Eleanor looked around the table at those familiar faces, and tears rolled down her cheeks. "I waited for this moment for 35 years, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "A family. I thought I would die alone in that institution. I thought I'd never see my son grow up, never sit at breakfast with my family, never feel this happiness. But now I have everything." Cole took his mother's hand, his own eyes burning. "You'll never be alone again," he said. "I promise." Just then, footsteps sounded at the gate. Garrett Stone appeared, serious as ever. "Boss, there's an urgent problem that needs handling," Garrett said, looking at Cole with insistence. "Someone's waiting outside." Cole looked at Garrett, then back at the table, at his mother smiling, at Harper pouring more coffee for Warren, at the unfinished family breakfast. Then he smiled. A real smile, the first smile in 36 years that felt like it rose from the deepest part of him. "It can wait until tomorrow, Garrett," Cole said evenly. "I'm busy today." Garrett blinked, his brow furrowing. "Busy with what?" Cole turned back to the table and sat down beside his mother. "I'm home with my family." Eleanor leaned her head against Harper's shoulder, her eyes resting on her son with all the love she'd kept in her heart for 35 years. She whispered, her voice trembling but every word clear. "My son." Cole knew that no matter who he was out there, a mob boss, a name that made all of Chicago afraid, a shadow in the underworld, here, in this house, beneath the old oak, beside his mother and the woman he loved, he was only one thing, his mother's son. And that was the only title that truly mattered. This story brings us a profound lesson about the value of family and love. No matter how harsh life can be, no matter how long lies can cover the truth, light will always find a way through the darkness. 35 years is a terrifyingly long time, yet a mother's love never faded. Eleanor still called her son's name every night, and Cole still carried the emptiness of a mother he'd never truly known. When they found each other again, all those years of suffering suddenly gained meaning. The story also reminds us that forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. Eleanor couldn't forgive Warren right away, or everything that happened, but she chose to let go of hatred, so she could live her remaining days in peace. That is true human strength. And most of all, this story shows that family isn't defined only by blood. Harper, an orphaned girl with no one in the world, found her family beside Eleanor and Cole. Family is where we belong, where we are loved without condition, where we can be ourselves. Dear friends, if this story touched your heart, please hit the subscribe button on our channel, press like, and share this video with the people you love. Every subscription, every like, every share is a huge motivation that helps us keep bringing you moving stories every day. We'd truly love to hear how you feel about this story. Have you ever lived through a moment when family meant everything to you? What do you think about Cole's journey to finding his mother again? Please leave a comment below and share with us what's in your heart. We read and cherish every single comment. Finally, we wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace each day. Cherish the loved ones beside you, because they're the most precious gift life can give. Thank you for being with us in today's story. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again in the next video.